Sorry.
I think when one looks to assess the achievements or lack of achievements of the Selangor government since March 8, 2008, it is important to appreciate the context upon which this new government had found itself. We're talking about a government who never governed before. The party of Pakatan had never had much experience in running a state. They had a lot of experience being opposition party members, but never running it over. So when they had taken over, there is a issue of them having to learn what to do. And I suppose this inability to understand what was going on, and it's through no fault of their own, like I said, they've never actually had that opportunity, took a lot of time and delayed a lot of things. That is the subtle relationships between the federal government, the state government, the local government, the federal government and the local government, the royal houses, the civil service. All these complexities made it difficult to people who are non-professionals or skilled in this area to be able to move. I think an example would be they were given a very sophisticated jet fighter, but they didn't have a pilot for the jet fighter because that pilot had no training. So they did not use this sophisticated jet fighter, and they were more comfortable using older tools that sometimes had questionable ability to actually achieve their targets. I suppose not many people understand. They think government is everything. It can make any decision. Very few of them understood that the government itself had bonded itself in contract, and a lot of the decision-making processes could not go through because their hands were tied through previous actions, be that whether land was given off, be that whether water was privatized, whether solid waste management was privatized. So they inherited all these privatized contracts, and when they looked at the thing in detail, they began to understand that they could not move very much in terms of financial control. I think it is true to say that the state government is not totally in control of its both financial as well as its manpower in the state. That is, the state government actually does not ultimately have full financial independence. It is very much dependent on the federal government and the federal government's regulations and procedures, and it cannot even hire and fire who it likes. There is this subtle influence of the federal civil service within the context of the state government that inhibits the state government from actually appointing who they want. I think the classic example is the appointment of the state secretary, where the Menteri Besar himself could not appoint his number 2 person, and the whole outcry in relation to that. So once you understand that in order to change things, you need financial control and management control. Without financial control, total management control, you cannot change things as fast or in the way you want to do so. Now, having said that, if I judge the state government in that context, I think they've done reasonably well. First of all, they've brought in a level of honesty, I'm not saying all actions are totally honest, but a level of honesty which was never experienced before in terms of the transparency of those processes. And I'll give you some examples later on dealing specifically with local government. They also did 2 things which I think, if we look at their report card, are the most important things for the Rakyat. One, they managed to give everybody free water. That is, up to 20 cubic meters of water is free of charge. This is treated water. I don't think there's any country in the world where water is given treated water for free of charge. The second thing, which was a more recent announcement, was they give them a lease of land practically free of charge. That is, under the new policy for residential leases, they will extend that lease for 99 years for 1,000 ringgit. So a member of the public at least has water and do not have to worry about having to be pushed out of their lease property when the leases run out. I think this has never ever been done before by any previous government. Certainty of land and the right to stay there as a Selangorian, and water, I think are 2 of their biggest achievements and the most visible achievements they have done. Okay, they brought in also an element of good governance. I think this cannot be denied in terms of opening up the governmental processes to the scrutiny of the public and the media. I think things like freedom of information bills, stakeholder discussions have been taken to a level never experienced before in the state of Selangor. In terms of management of the state, well, in Petaling Jaya, where I'm a member of the city council, there's definitely a marked improvement in services being provided, and in addressing grievances. So I think some of the major policy changes to serve the Rakyat, I think they have put in the mechanisms. Of course, there are a lot of constraints. The state government cannot hire who it likes to go and get the job done. There's a lot of very subtle ways in which the best man or woman for the job cannot get the job. What happens is whenever the government wants to give work, they are required to take those contractors, those persons from a list. And this list is a closed list. It's a list of individuals and it is not open readily to people of other races. That is, Indians and Chinese cannot get those necessary permits to offer their services. Now, I believe the state government has made several announcements in the last week that they're going to open it up. They're going to have a registration system based on merit, not based on race. But this has not come to pass because of obstacles being put in the government's part by way of the relationship between federal and state laws and federal and state policies. So they have tried to make some attempts, but I believe that they should have addressed this issue more substantially. The first thing the local government did when they came to power was, in fact, to form independent audit and governance committees. That is, these are independent from the mayor to be able to check on malpractices, corruption, to check on things that are not done properly. So this was formed by MPPJ. The first person to in fact do that was Majlis Bandaraya Petaling Jaya, and this is now a statewide model. The second was the local authority came out with the philosophy that if you commercially benefit from government asset, from local government asset, commercially benefit, and you're not in a needy group, then you should pay fair market value for the utilization of that asset. You cannot be given token sums and make big money on government land when that land belongs to the government and is meant for the public. So the public must directly benefit from the commercial exploitation of government resources. That principle was extended in billboards, for instance, where land in which was given for a small charge while commercial operations are taking place on those lands, that is billboard activities, no fair market rental was paid to the local authority. But now at the moment, as a result of that, I think about 5 to 6 million additional revenue now the local authority has in terms of using that, so less burden on the ratepayer. The local government also offers free services for the disabled, for instance bus services, and a lot of free clinics for the hardcore poor. That means you get free medical treatment if you're one of the hardcore poor. Yes, it also opened up its budget. Now this is important. The only local authority to allow its budget to be examined by the public. That is, to allow members of the public to comment on the budget and make suggestions. We are the first one to open it up, and I believe it's the only one in Selangor. Now the other thing which is incredible is to allow members of parliament as well as state assemblymen to attend all the meetings of the local government, all the committee meetings, and to appraise them, give them material, so that when decision making is made, the stakeholder, that is the MP as well as the ADUN, who are the custodians of the trust of the people because you elected them, have a say, have a opportunity to voice their opinion. So this was never done before, this level of transparency. This level of transparency was then extended to the planning control. That is, when there's a project for development, a signboard is put on the site inviting comments from the public, and not just neighboring landowners, which was the old position. All members of the public can give comment, and a hearing will be held, and documents are given to those people who are objecting or who have grievances. So this level of community participation in the local government process, unparalleled in Petaling Jaya. I think the best, in Malaysia at the moment, in terms of course, they may not necessarily agree with what you have to say, but that opportunity to say it is given, and it is respected above and beyond the minimum requirements of the law. And of course, again, we were the first to embrace green policies and make it mandatory. And of course, we talk about rating a building as to its greenness and offering incentives if you in fact make your building. Also, you will not disagree that your collection of your rubbish, patching of road holes and basic services have improved remarkably from what was before. I mean, before you never saw anybody even clean a drain. You actually see people cleaning the drain. The next thing which we did was quite revolutionary, was to zone areas in PGA, basically divide it up and get a councillor assigned to that area to provide a better, more personalised level of service. And in the past, you would not even know who your city councillor was. Now, regularly, they are calling the city councillor on the handphone and communicating with them through the means of communication to get things done. Now, the other outstanding achievement was to appoint for the first time in the history a person who is not a member of the civil service to be the director of public complaints within a local government. So somebody was outside was appointed, and he was to handle public grievances and complaints. And as a result of that, a quick response team was formed to address localized problems, difficulties, service disruptions. So in terms of governance of services, there's been an improvement. Of course, not nearly as much as everybody thought they could do in the short span of time, and this is due to systemic obstacles being put in the path. For instance, inability to be totally financially independent, control your financial affairs, to be able to manage, to hire and fire. So, for instance, we can't just hire and fire whichever suitable person, hire a suitable person or fire a person. The policies of management are very much limited, and so I suppose with taking that into mind, I think they've done a remarkably good job in terms of what they did. Of course, there's huge areas of improvement, but in order to improve, you must understand the obstacles, and I won't go into the details, but they are detailed, systemic obstacles which somehow the leadership are unable to be able to resolve it. Now, like I said, the lease extension, I think, is one of the biggest achievements of this government to provide that, and even that took about 2.5 years of thinking about the problem. So I think the way forward for the government would be to be open to invite more professionals and experts in their field, NGOs to come in and assist the government. There's a reservoir of talent, but that talent is not being tapped properly and effectively. And I suppose this is one of the things the government must improve. Okay, one of the promises of the new government was to hold local government elections, and that is those people appointed to local government who are now appointed by the Chief Minister, we should have them elected. This is something which was promised and something which would have been very good to do. But what we have seen now is the tendency of political parties to want to hold on to power, fear that they may lose that power, and they have not pursued the election of local government with the diligence and the openness that they promised. The legal grounds for saying they can't do it is based on the argument that federal government approval is required to hold local government elections. And there's a debate on that, and this debate is on the net. You can actually have a look at that debate and the points being raised. So as an alternative to going through the legal discourse, a more speedy way of doing it would be for the Chief Minister or the Menteri Besar to agree to appoint those people who the public elect. So it is actually an election, and there's a promise that whoever the public elect will be appointed. That would actually, for practical purposes, achieve the same objective without having to go through a discourse and a legal argument on whether it is constitutional or not constitutional. We've got in Majlis Bandaraya Petaling Jaya, we've got 24 councillors, and the theory was 6-6-6-6. That was what it was supposed to be: 6 from PKR, 6 from PAS, 6 from DAP, and 6 for NGO, which is opened up to non-government organizations, individuals and professionals to bring in that added expertise. So presently, they are looking at getting the 6 so-called NGO seats open for election, which means that the majority control is still in the hands of the political parties, and no political party will be risking any seat. So there are safe seats. Now what's going to happen from a practical perspective is, once they open elections for the so-called 6 NGO seats, political parties will be fielding their own candidates also in there, under the guise of NGO or guise of somebody else, or even there's nothing stopping them from directly participating. So you're going to end up getting a bigger spread of political components within the local government, and you won't have even any NGOs, you won't have any person being able to participate in the democratic process. The 18 seats are already safe. I mean, the majority is still controlled by them. So it's just tokenism to appease the public. But done. Of course, they've inherited a lot of bad decisions, bad approvals, which the public must understand. They can't just reverse these approvals. But in terms of accountability in the development process, I think it's been much more transparent. Now, obviously, where you have a government who is committed to be honest, committed to be non-corrupt, and as far as the leaderships are concerned, I think the majority there is certainly non-corrupt, and the difficulty with that from a pragmatic consideration would be, as the more honest you get, the more you try to impose, have guidelines, rules and regulations, a certain component of the business community would be very upset, because they will never had to in fact go through this before. Everything could have been done with payment of money, for instance, but now payment of money or under-table money or corrupt money, it cannot get you the result because there's more transparency, more scrutiny. So you will obviously get some criticisms of the business processes being slowed down, but you have to look at it into the totality that in the past, the government was basically raped of its resources by one-sided agreements. Agreements are entered into, government land is given for development and the government gets back next to nothing, whilst developers take the chunk of this valuable land, and then there's whole proxy companies and so on and so forth. So any type of control, as you put in these control measures, you're going to upset the people who used to enjoy the benefits of this. And this includes privatization contracts, for instance, dealing with whether it be garbage, solid waste management, whether it be parking, for instance. Parking is a virtual monopoly in terms of giving out the... So this whole privatization thing was not easy to undo. And if one looks at privatization in the state government context, it is more like privatization, basically, because all the good parts are privatized and all the burden is left back to the public. So a new government has inherited these problems, and it's going to be difficulty in managing these problems. The biggest weakness of the state government is the inability to effectively implement its good policies. Having passed a good policy, not many of our state leaders know how to make this policy work on the ground. That gap has been traditionally filled up by the civil servants to carry out that task. And there seems to be some reluctance within the civil service establishment to move at the speed on which the leadership wants to implement those changes. So I suppose people will say, great policy, but look, I still have the same problem. Now that critical gap between policy and its implementation lies squarely in the hands of the civil service to be able to implement it. And the state government has not been sufficiently effective in getting the right people to carry out that job. For instance, if they've announced a policy of lease renewal, giving a fantastic deal, 30% discount on the lease, or 1,000 ringgit for 99 years, I mean, really great policies, but how many people as of today have actually applied for this? So that process of communicating leadership policy to the people is not being very effective, and also implementing those policies. And this is the biggest weakness they have. It's not necessarily their fault. Sometimes obstacles are deliberately put in their path to stop these great policies from reaching the people. If you look at the average person, in the urban setting at least, I think they believe that they've been given a more fair go under the present government. And certainly with the two major reforms in terms of land ownership and water, I think they can look back and say, what has this government done in 4 years? Well, at least they give me a cheap lease, and also they give me free water, and they provide a better level of service. I think this will be the swaying factor in terms of a voter who lives in this area. I mean, so I think they do still have the edge. It's not a big edge, but I believe they have an edge in the next general election. And certainly they have the edge in the urban areas. In the rural areas, it's a little bit more sophisticated problem in terms of service is not necessarily the number one criteria. There are other considerations in terms of welfare, earning a living, so on and so forth. So I think they do have to work on that part of it. But on the balance of probabilities, I think it's in their favor presently, but things can change.